Yep. Okay, perfect. Look, I'll kick off. I'd like to acknowledge the beautiful Ngunnawal country that I'm dialing in from today. It's freezing, but it's beautiful and sunny, so at least that's a bit encouraging. If all the participants would like to enter into the chat what country they're dialing in from today, that would just help us and know kind of what our reach is and where our viewers are coming from. Great, I can't see. Oh, perfect. Thanks, I can see them all popping up there now. Or someone else from Ngunnawal country. How cold is it? Oh my goodness. Thanks, everyone. Look, I think we'll kick off with some introductions. Elle, do you want to go first?
Sure. Oh my gosh, the chat is blowing up. I'd like to acknowledge all of these amazing custodians who've cared for country that you're dialing in from today. This virtual world means that we're able to reach such a far and wide audience, which is pretty deadly, particularly during NAIDOC. So my name's Ellie Davidson. I'm a Balangara woman from the East Kimberley. I'm a long way off country here in Bundjalung country, which is Mullumbimby, my hometown. Just behind me is a really important mountain, and I just pay respects to the Arakal Bundjalung people and all of the people of the Bundjalung Nation who've cared for this country that I get to call home, and pay my respects to my old people and my ancestors from up the Kimberley. Wish I was there right now. I wouldn't need a heater under my desk, but you know, we're here and I'm not complaining about being able to live in this beautiful part of country. Thanks. Oh, I'm handing over to Carol.
Carol. Hi everybody, Marang Barang. My name's Carol Vale and I'm a Dungari woman from northern New South Wales. I have bloodlines to Gumbangi and Anawan mob. I'm really excited to see all the First Nations lands being shown up in the chat room there. You know, this is about this theme this year is about Heal Country, and I'm really looking forward to having the conversation with all of you. Jesse.
Hello, Jesse Marnock. I'm dialing in from Gimwe Wallabo, the Ninji land, also where my mob is from, with bloodlines to Tarabulong down in Bundaberg. But yeah, thanks for joining us. And I guess we'll kick it off with our first starting question to oh sorry, yep, Moana.
Oh, Jesse, I'd love to be able to introduce myself.
Oh, sorry. So then to you, Moana, sorry.
Thank you. Hi, look, like I said, my name is Moana Prescott. I'm a Nyampa woman from Western New South Wales with strong connections to the Barkindji and Willakali people from Broken Hill Wakanya region. And yeah, like I said at the beginning, dialing in from sunny but cold Ngunnawal country. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here today. And I suppose I will, oh, g'day Ed. I'll kick off with the first question, which is why we all got involved in the Planning with Country Knowledge Circle. And Jesse, I might start with you. Why did you get involved, mate? What's your interest here? Maybe you could share a bit about your background, your professional background if you want. Yeah.
So I am relatively new to the industry, but I realized during and post study, I realized there's a lack of Indigenous people in the planning industry. So personally, I saw it as an opportunity to network and learn and share knowledge with both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people who have been working in this space. But joining this group, it also gives me an insight on the planning industry and its as a whole and its direction. And this group it gives an opportunity to help develop or guide the planning industry as a whole with an Indigenous context. So, but it also shows the wider community that there are Indigenous people within the space that are working, because you know it's far in between where you see an Indigenous person working in the space. So yeah, well that's why I got involved with this. So I'll pass it over to Ellie.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I mean, I firstly just feel very privileged to share this space with the three of you. I feel really grateful that you know, Pia is making this commitment and wanting to establish a group of people that, you know, can help inform, you know, what having an impact looks like in this space. I think, you know, we're always about, you know, Aboriginal led solutions and action, and I feel really privileged to share this space with you and to really help kind of identify what Pia can be doing. As one of the, you know, few Aboriginal planners, it's can feel a little bit lonely sometimes, so shout out to any Aboriginal planners that are joining us today. Please come forth, send us an email or be in touch, because I suppose, you know, part of this is about trying to connect and create a network. I think for us, like, you know, I know, for instance, in the architecture space, they have a really strong kind of Indigenous network that's building. So I'm definitely hopeful about trying to create that space and see more Aboriginal people in this industry and to network. I think it can be really overwhelming to know what to do. I feel like there's so many things that need to change. This conversation is one of those steps, but I think it's a real a very strong kind of reason that I got involved was to help inform a very measured approach. Sometimes people can overcommit in this space and try to do too much, and I think being able to be involved in that conversation about how we can have measured and strategic impact and what that looks like is something that I'm really grateful to be a part of. So I might pass over to you, Carol.
Thank you. When I was asked to join this group, you know, I mean, I'm not a planner, and my first love is sociology. So for me, I guess, you know, if I fall into any area, it's that area of, you know, planning for the social side of our communities, and I think that is really important. One of the things that really, I guess, excited me for joining this group is it's about bringing the technical and the cultural together, and so therefore the typical town planning processes, along with, you know, the things that you have to look for as a sociologist, and how you bring those together, and then you marry that up with the Indigenous lens over that. I think the role of planners is incredibly important. We do, I've got a government background. I worked for government for over 30 years, and a lot of that space has been in the, you know, the community development planning area. And I think Moana was the first Indigenous planner that I'd ever met, and she was I don't even think you graduated from uni at the time, so I quickly went over and said, "Oh my God, an Aboriginal planner," and said, "Come work for the department." And so we need more. We certainly need to grow the sector. But whilst we're growing the sector, and this is one of the reasons I joined the circle, I think the sector and the industry, there is still an amazing resource of Indigenous people out there, and, you know, colleagues that they may not be planners, but their work fits with the world of planning. And so it's about how do you create the space for them to be engaged and at the table with you, so that they are, you know, that you are collaborating and looking at how the integration of both the Indigenous, you know, perspectives, along with the you know, I guess the machinations of planning. But one of the things that really excited me about the circle as well was that it's Indigenous and non-Indigenous people that sit around that table. We are of different ages, and we come from different walks of life, but all of that reflects society. And I think, so we've got this wealth of knowledge there, and it's about I'm glad that Pia is going to take the opportunity to garner that, to provide advice and direction out to your members, and therefore that will, you know, without a doubt, that type of approach will certainly benefit our communities across this country, which is what's needed. That's me, Jessie. Oh, I've got to pass on the next
Moana,
one.
Guys, don't forget about me. I'm here too.
I know we keep forgetting. It's the earring, Moana, you know. Getting distracted.
No, all good. Look, I mean, I think I joined the Knowledge Circle because what's the saying about nothing about us without us? And so I originally wanted to be a planner, to study planning, because I was really passionate about the way that the built environment can have such a big impact on people's lives, people's day-to-day. I mean, you think about if you don't have good roads, how can you get anywhere? Or if you, I don't know, if there's a crack in the sidewalk, how can mum push a pram, or how can uncle or auntie push their walker, kind of thing. So it's, to me, those are silly examples, but those are really small examples that can make a really big difference to someone's life. And that's the kind of influence and impact that I wanted to have as a planner. And I suppose through my education, I felt that there wasn't a big enough recognition or acknowledgement about the wealth of knowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people had about land and country. And so was a bit of a squeaky wheel throughout my degree about trying to integrate a bit more of that that knowledge. And I suppose when Audrey asked, I was more than happy to join Pia's Planning with Country Knowledge Circle, just so I could influence that from a different lens. I suppose I also feel like a bit of an imposter planner, because whilst I did study planning, I only worked in it very briefly, and then went and did another government job, and I suppose I'm back in stakeholder engagement now, but just a different perspective, and I felt like I needed to caveat that. But look, I think this year's theme is really beautiful, and is probably I think really poignant as to where Australia is up to in our reconciliation journey, and where we're up to in the national kind of conversation about how Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australia come together, like Carol said, talking about partnerships. And I suppose, Carol, did you want to talk to the theme a bit more and what it means to you, and why you think it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was thinking about this theme, you know, I think back, there was another theme a couple of years ago called Because of Her We Can. And so when I think about country, and I'm going to try not to get emotional, country, like it's, and I know that you would have all, you know, I'm hoping that you would have all heard Aboriginal people speak about country. And when we speak about country, it is the capital C, and it's a capital C for a reason, because it is a living entity. It is a living entity that absolutely infiltrates all of who we are. So, you know, and you might read some words like country is everything. It's the sky, it's the land, it's the waters, it's underneath, but it's more than that. It is the very essence of who we are. And I don't mean to speak on behalf of other Indigenous people, but I guess I'm saying that is the essence of our connection to place. And when you're talking about planning in the built environment, if there's anything that when you know, it's about how do you take your work and make country, country show up in all that you're doing. When I think of country, I think of, I feel it in my feet. And even now I'm on Gadigal country, but my feet are feeling tingly because I'm talking about country and I'm thinking about my homelands, you know, and I'm thinking about walking there near granite rocks and, next to the waterways where I grew up. And so this, I guess, country, even if we're thinking about it, it starts to, make us feel good. And so that sort of feeling contributes to closing the gap on Indigenous disadvantage. So when we talk about heal country, it's you heal country because it's about healing people. And you're right, Moana, it is about where we are in Australian society, in relation to our relationship with each other. And if we can work together to heal country, because she has been disrupted, she has been, uplifted. And I understand that development happens and it will continue to happen. But how do you restore what you've damaged? All of us. How do we restore what we've had to, shift for the sake of development or, whatever it might be? And I think about country, and country is, and maybe I'm getting older, I don't know. I think I'm the oldest of all of you there, but certainly, she's meaning more and more to me. She's meaning more and more to me, and everything I do and touch now, I just want to make sure that piece of work contributes back to the wellness of country, because if that happens, then that contributes back to the wellness of Indigenous people, and certainly others, non-Indigenous people that will come and share of this place. Ellie, what about you when you think of the theme? What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like what you shared about, heal country and she'll heal us, I do feel like there's reciprocity, and that, we believe that we're part of country. So there is a really huge part of this which is really personal. And I think, like, in a Western framework, it's very easy to kind of separate land from people, and we try to harness land for our purposes rather than thinking about that reciprocity and how we need to live in an interconnected way with country. And I feel the same as you in terms of, like, the older you get, the closer you feel connected, but also the more obligation you feel. I feel like that's just the journey of learning. Like, the more you learn, the more responsible you feel, and so your passion towards how you can decrease and so country can increase, and how to challenge the way that we're taught to think in a Western framework in this industry in comparison to what our old people would want us to do, which is to put other things before ourselves. And I feel like that's part of why this theme is really important to me, because I think it's something that I am personally committed to and professionally committed to, and I want to see other people professionally committed to it as well, because I think it is something for all of us to be considering, and we're not necessarily taught how to do that in our normal education, in our normal work settings, in our normal approach to business as usual in the projects that we work on. So and the policies that we write, it's never about prioritizing anything beyond humans and human needs. So I feel like it's a really important conversation for us to have as a planning industry, what our responsibilities are in the healing of country. Like, for sure, as you said, we can't say that development isn't going to happen, but how can development be regenerative and be responsive to where we need to go, and why it's important to think differently about the choices that we're making. And I think it's about humbling ourselves as humans and realizing we're doing so much damage, and we're on a trajectory towards a place that many of us feel quite concerned about. So I think reflecting on this and thinking about country as something completely different is really important for us. But it's also, I think, a time to stop and listen about what Aboriginal knowledge can do to lead this space, and to think, people got these things like sustainability and these words, but what does it look to empower Aboriginal knowledge in this space about what healing country means to us, people who'd been here for generations and thousands of years, who'd had stewardship over this country. So that's why I think it's important for me and for us as an industry. Moana, I'm keen to hear from you.
Thanks, Elle. Look, I mean, like I said, I think that this was an appropriate theme for where we're up to in kind of a national conversation. So obviously last year the theme was always will be Aboriginal land. And look, I think we're at the point where we know Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia has a wealth of knowledge, and the question is now, okay, well, how do we use it? How do we integrate this into ways of working? How do we reprioritize this as the kind of preferred way? And I think what I particularly like about this theme is that it feels like an acknowledgement of that perhaps Eurocentric or Western ways of working aren't always best, and that perhaps we need to reframe that and not do Aboriginal consultation as part of things. Maybe it actually needs to lead projects, or maybe it needs to happen in a different direction or a different theme. And look, I know a few comments earlier, Audrey had put in the NAIDOC week theme, and I really encourage everyone to read the words that the committee has written, because it's really beautiful. But if there's just one sentence I'd like to read to everyone, and it's: healing country means embracing First Nations cultural knowledge and understanding of country as part of Australia's national heritage. And I think the "as part of" is really critical, because it's Aboriginal Indigenous history is part of the Australian history. It's part of all of us. It's a part of everyone. And I think people could really do themselves a favour by learning a little bit more about, okay, how Aboriginal people were treated, or how the planning industry was used to negatively affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. You only need to visit a former mission or reserve to see kind of how our industry has affected the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And so I think it's a really beautiful theme. I think it's critically important to kind of to progress our national conversation. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to more conversations such as this. So Jesse, does any of that ring true to you, or am I just...
No, yeah.
Look, why is it important to you? Do you feel special about this theme, or?
So when I think about healing country, and no, like you've all said, and we talk Indigenous in the Indigenous context. We talk about the lands, the waters, the peoples, the spirits, and our ancestors, and the animals on the land. It's all interconnected and it's all one. So under that context, when I think of heal country, I think of healing people. Yeah. So and I think this is evident with when you're talking about healing country, we're talking about the lands and the waters, and the lands and the waters, they give us non-Indigenous and Indigenous life, and I believe, and I'm sure a lot of other Indigenous peoples across Torres Strait and Australia, they also believe that once we leave this land, we pass on and we go back to our ancestors, we go back to the land. So and then it comes into the with healing country is the healing. Healing means there's been damage, and to me that is like you've been talking about, Moana, is the wrongs that have been done in the past, and under colonization, specifically the dispossession of the people from their lands. Missions were set up and across the country that forced Indigenous people, the lucky Indigenous people, I should say, to forcibly be moved onto land that didn't belong to them, and then that's the disconnect from their land, and those people are still there in these missions today, and so that's the start of an unhealthy country and unhealthy people. And I don't need to spit out the facts about life expectancy and incarceration rates and truancies in schools. The media does all that, but it is a direct consequence of the past acts. So when I think of healing country, I think healthy country equals healthy people. And the question is, how do us as a planning industry, how we facilitate better outcomes for the people on their land and on country, because at the end of the day, planning is just land use management. And if we need to, as the planning industry, we need to facilitate healthy country for people and their communities, and this will make people happy. So and healthy, sorry. So that's what healing country means to me. So has anyone else got any comments further on what it means to them? No. All right. So we'll go with Ella. How do you think the planning industry can contribute to healing country?
That was to me, right?
Yeah.
I think some interesting things have come up in the chat, which I'm sort of looking to and considering. I think for me, it is about a change in mindset and the way that we do things, because I think the Moana sort of talked about it before in terms of how do we empower Aboriginal voices earlier in the process. And like right now, you know, this linear kind of system that we engage with is that around the kind of cultural heritage assessment is when we would think about talking to Aboriginal people. But there's a question, you know, that's come here. You know, Paul kind of talked about his troubles in sort of seeing things completely cleared and greenfield and just, you know, basically being able to look at it as a blank canvas. And for us as Aboriginal people, we don't see country as a blank canvas. All parts of country have meaning. There are special places, but they're interconnected through all of the other parts of country too. So for me, a big part of the kind of I suppose methodology of planning and the way that we do our work needs to start with country. And for that to happen, it's about talking to knowledge holders and understanding the value of that place in a cultural landscape. It's that right now, I think, you know, we've been taught to kind of fit within these boundaries and these lines, and that might be at a regional context, it might be at a state context, but we're not very good at looking at country as a cultural landscape, which is an interconnected map or web of places that are important and that they all relate and connect to each other. So this question and the struggles that Paul raised, which I think has then hit a couple of people in the chat as well. For me, that's what, you know, planning can contribute, is changing the approach and methodology to how development occurs. So actually doing some cultural values mapping ahead of making decisions about what's going to happen in a particular place. I think we're very quick to allocate, okay, this land is going to be used for this, and then we'll talk to people at some point. But you know, people talk about this process of co-design, and I feel like my response to that is always, well, did Aboriginal people have a right to say no? Because if they didn't, then that's not what I believe co-design is about. It's actually going to Aboriginal people and saying, what would you like to see happen? Oh, blow me down if that happens, you know, like actually being led by Aboriginal people in what their priorities are for planning and the things that they'd like to see, rather than the process now being like, we've got this idea, we want to engage with you about it. What for me the future looks like is a process of actually sitting down and having a yarn with people who have aspirations for country and looking at ways to collaboratively, you know, work on those things together for mutually beneficial outcomes and some reciprocity, rather than this more one way and you get to kind of respond to what I'm saying and what I need. So I think in terms of how the planning industry can contribute, it's probably checking themselves and that methodology and actually allowing Aboriginal people to lead the conversation about what their priorities are for country, and then, you know, supporting that and finding out where that reciprocity is in terms of what you can get back from that yarn. So yeah, it's a big shift, and I know it doesn't necessarily fit into the way that we do things, but that's what we're here to do, right? Decolonize the system. That's another thing the planning industry can do. That's a big yarn. But I'm going to hand over to Moana. What are your thoughts on this thing of planning industry's contribution to healing country?
Look, I think planning and planners and the planning industry is actually quite empowered to work towards this theme and to go towards fulfilling it, because we make decisions on country, about country, that will affect country every single day. And so we again, as an imposter planner, you guys, we need to make a commitment to improve or start at least engagement with First Nations people. That's actually quite. Look, I couldn't have said it better, Ellie. Like it's that engagement. It's that prioritising Indigenous voices. It's giving Indigenous people the right to say no, or at least working with them on their timeframes in a way that they want to work. If I could give you a recent example, not a project that I'm currently working on, but a project that was happening out west. They were up until one point, only recently taking submissions, emailed submissions or typed submissions. Not a lot of people in these communities either had reliable access to internet or even a laptop or a computer to do these submissions. And so I think there's work being done to look at either recording submissions or a scribe going out to community to try to write them down and take them in a different way. And I think that reframing of how we can be more inclusive, so we can actually get genuine engagement with this as an Aboriginal community. I think that will go towards healing country and fulfilling this year's theme. Carol, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I guess ways of working that I've certainly been deliberately bringing into my work in this space when I'm at the table with planners and developers and designers. And so a lot of the time people talk about customer-centric approaches and human-centered approaches and all of that. And so what I think is, and it's a bit like if you put the Aboriginal child, I used to do a lot of work in the child protection space. And so if you put for me it was about if you put the Aboriginal child in the middle of your, your problem solving process, then you'll get it right for everybody because of the complexities that Indigenous child faces. It's the same I think it's the same for when you're working in this space. If you come from a country-centered approach to your work, then by default, you're going to be taking into consideration economics, social, cultural, mobility, weather systems, sustainability, everything that any project needs to consider. If it comes from a country-centered perspective, then it can't, for me, I think, well, it can't go wrong really, because then it's applying what should be there, and you're also helping to help to re-emerge what should be there as well. So it's taking a country-centered approach, but then also you fellas, you used to work with grids and systems and and lines, and so I often think about, well, what would it be like if you applied a kinship system grid, a kinship system, but applied it in a grid context across your work. And again, so if you come from a country-centered approach with the application of a kinship system grid across your work, then you will enable, Aboriginal voices, Aboriginal, knowledge systems, all of that to be captured in your work. Kinship systems, that enables things like songlines, storylines, all of that to be told, and all of those things were told and used for purpose, and those things then in turn around and they contributed, to Australia being home to the oldest living culture on the planet. Like no other country in the world gets to say that. And so I guess they're those two things. Everything. And if you think about our old people, when they did their stuff, it was all about country. Country is at the heart of it. And so how do you come from that country-centric approach? You never lose the rigor of your tool, your planning tools, you bring that there, but you might need to adapt and reshape them if you're going to work in this country-centered way. And then the other one is, next time you're doing a project, think about what it would look like if you applied and worked with, local Aboriginal people to apply a kinship system approach to that. Because in the kinship system, it guides behaviour, it guides, what's planted, when things are eaten. All of these things are part of the use of the kinship system. Who you can talk to, who you can't talk to, all of that. And so I think we just need to look back to some of our things that are already there within Indigenous ways of being and doing and seeing the world, and just enabling that to come in, to this, to the Western world of planning. But I think the planning sector can certainly should look at coming from a country-centered approach for sure. Jesse, have you had a yarn about that?
Not yet, but so where the planning industry can contribute to healing country, I think the best way is to get Indigenous people in the industry itself. So I think the answer is to that is support and advocate for more Indigenous peoples in this industry, in the working space. You know, like we said, yeah, Moana the imposter, but as she said, but yeah, we need more Indigenous people in this industry. But so when I try to explain to people what planning is, I generally think in its simplest term is, you know, land use management, which I said before. In the Indigenous context, when I could be wrong, but I'm speaking for myself, I feel like when land use management is said in the Indigenous context, it's generally confined to, you know, ranger programs, which is, you know, land and sea programs or bushfire management systems that they run. But I'd like to see, you know, one step further and, you know, get more people, Indigenous mob, studying, doing a tertiary education in this field. But I also think it's generally because all that Indigenous peoples and their in the communities, they how do I explain it? If they haven't seen it before or know of it or shown it before, then they're not going to pursue it. So I take the example when I, like my own example, when I was at uni up here in Cairns, you know, there's a lot of mob studying, you know, nursing and teaching, and then you know, along with that is a supportive community throughout their degree, and you know, nursing is related to health, you know, and with Indigenous mob, we know, you know, there's a lot of major health issues, you know. So they've seen that before, and you know, teaching, you know, we're all forced to go to school from the age of 5 years old, so they've seen teaching before. I myself, like, had not seen or even heard of planning or knew what it was. The only reason I picked up planning is I was in and out of uni for 3 years, chopping and changing my degree, and then I just looked at the subjects that I engaged with, and I just matched it with a planning degree. So that's my personal experience. You know, that's the only reason I picked up planning in the first place. And then once I got in, I realized, like, the potential that planning industry can do for Indigenous peoples, like with my, you know, with my Indigenous lens on. So yeah, I think the best thing that the planning industry can do is to contribute to healing country, is facilitate more Indigenous peoples in this field, in this space. And yeah, it can be done by educating people. But yeah, I guess that leads to our next question, which is
yes, Jesse, can I jump?
Sorry,
can I just jump in there? I want to share a quick little story about. So I have 10 grandchildren, and one of them, Lige, he's a really good drawer. And so the last few years I've been doing a lot of work with architects, and which I hadn't done for, you know, that hadn't been part of my world. Anyway, I went home and I was telling Lige, I said, buddy, like, these fellas, they draw all the time, and that, you know, that's their job. And he said, and I said, you should be an architect when you grow up. And he said, no, I don't want to be an architect. I want to be a bus driver or something like that. Anyway, I said, okay. I said, but they do lots of drawing and they make lots of money. And then, and then a couple of weeks later, when he saw me, he said, oh, Nan, I want to be an architect, because he saw it, because I'd mentioned that to him, and because he saw it on TV. So there must have been some sort of architect firm, you know, doing an ad on TV. He said, I want to be an architect because I want to draw like them. So you're right. Like, we only know what we know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought I'd just share that.
Cool.
I've been an architect, but anyway.
I suppose it's that thing, you know, you can't be what you can't see. That's and right. I feel like as an industry, I don't feel like we have articulated the value of what Aboriginal people bring, but also how Aboriginal people can give back to community. Like what you were saying there, Jessie, like, people are motivated into things like law and health and, you know, education, because they can see that being a direct contribution back to mob. And for us as Aboriginal people, we're motivated to do that. We want to give back, you know, we're not, and I think that that's just a cultural thing. It's not just about us, it's about our kinship structures, like what Carol shared. We're part of a bigger system, and it's not just this individual mindset. So I think, you know, as an industry, we really need to think about how we can articulate the value add of Aboriginal people in planning, what they give to us and what we get from them too. So it's, I feel, yeah, that reciprocity yarn, I think, keeps presenting to me, because sometimes I think, oh, you know, we want to just tick a box. We want to get that Aboriginal person in our workplace so we can feel good. I'm like, well, what are you going to do when they're there? Like, how are you going to empower them to, you know, not put them on the spot? It's not about, not every Aboriginal person wants to be put in this like cultural advisor role, but you know, fostering a space of cultural safety for an Aboriginal person within planning projects, and allowing them to not put the pressure on them, but allowing them to help shift and change the way that you think about approaching things, and allow them to challenge. Because a lot of the questions that are coming up in the chat about how do we respond to this and how do we do this, and all really great questions, which unfortunately I don't think we're going to have time to respond to, but you have more Aboriginal people in planning. They can help to resolve and respond to all of these questions that we're bringing up. You know, the reality is that we're always going to fit within this kind of Western legal construct. Unfortunately, I don't see that changing anytime soon. So for us, I think it's about listening to Aboriginal voices, understanding what their needs are, and trying to shift and change the system in a way that responds better to Aboriginal ways and perspectives. I talk a lot about this kind of being like having a bridge, and, you know, Aboriginal people being on one side of the bridge and the Western system being here, and how we've always required Aboriginal people to cross the bridge. Like, I feel like with this theme and where we're at right now, it's about how we're trying to bring the Western system across the bridge, and it's going to be slow and there's going to be a lot of resistance, but that's what these yarns are for, and that's what more Aboriginal people in planning will do, is to help us articulate what it is that needs to change, and then us collectively figuring out what needs to be decolonized in the system to give space. Moana, I'm keen to hear what your thoughts are on this. And I mean, you say like you're not really a planner, but you got that certificate, so you know, you got that piece of paper. You might not be practicing now, but you know.
Thanks. I should stop telling people I'm a fake planner. Look, no, Ellie, I think you summarized it really well, and I think the only additional point that I would make is that the concept of you don't know what you don't know, it's the same concept of non-Indigenous planners might not know what is perhaps harmful or less productive for the Indigenous community if they don't have an Indigenous person in the room. And so completely echo everyone's comments from earlier about, well, you need more Indigenous planners, because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a lot to offer planning, and it's that wealth of knowledge, it's that understanding, it's the things that, it's the lived experience that non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people will never have. So yeah, I think it's a just need more people in the room. And I think someone was totally right in the chat as well. Someone mentioned you never have to explain what engineering is. Why do I have to explain what planning is? People should just know. Very important. We're there. Look, does anyone have any other thoughts on this before we kind of move on to the last question? I know we've only got about 15 minutes left, so
I might just, one of the comments in there was about profit.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of planning, you know, and development, you know, having to take into consideration that issue. My advice back to the industry and those that work in it is that so Aboriginal country is everywhere. Regardless of what you put on top of her, she is still country. I'm in Gadigal country. I'm in this, you know, what is it? Big apartment, you know, it's lots of concrete, but it's still Gadigal country. So the DNA of Gadigal culture and people is right here, still here. It doesn't matter, even down there on the Opera House space, that is still the traditional lands of people that own it. So that's the first thing. And so then the second thing, and this way is, I think, was where profit comes into it. It's about how do you work with Aboriginal people to ensure that Aboriginal stuff that can be shared is seen and reflected in what you're developing and designing? Because I would imagine, you know, I mean, that, and if it's about the messaging of that, it's about the messaging that you know, what you're buying here is Indigenous informed. It's informed by the local culture. So what things look like when they're built, the way things are placed spatially. If you can connect the Indigenous story of place to that, then I think that's a value add. And so I think we fall back and we use profit as a bit of an excuse not to be courageous. And I think, so as planners, and I'm not saying that to offend, I really think it's, you know, I work for government service, I know, like we fall back to default position. But I think, how do we change the paradigm from this, from Indigenous issues being a negative to being an economically and socially and environmental of, you know, value add to everything that you're doing. And again, that brings it back to that country-centred approach. But we need to change the narrative in the way that we speak about Indigenous issues to come from a positive, from a strength-based place, I guess. And you know, I guess people come to, you know, people don't know. If you think people want difference, people want innovation, people want to see, you know, they don't just want the same old. So how can you help to create something unique and beautiful, but embedded with Indigenous perspectives? So I think cost is a bit of a cop-out. Anyway. Jesse, what do you reckon?
I'm just here listening for this one. But we might move on to our last question. Is that all right? Yeah.
Yep.
So do you have some practical tips or resources for planners to better understand the country? I'll pass it back to you, Carol.
Well,
tips?
Yeah, look, I've just, because we're in lockdown here, but there's all these wonderful resources, you know, on the web, and I've just finished watching Secret River again, and some of the pieces in there where, you know, it goes and puts his stake in the lander and says mine. I'm thinking, no, it's not. But it's that. So there's some great resources out there. Oh my goodness, there's so many. I mean, Dark Emu, you know, the greatest estate on earth. Yunka Porter's Sand Talk. I know Ellie's reading Alison Page's new document there, but also the likes of, you know, the Designing with Country framework from New South Wales. And I think, so here's the thing, planning industry, I think every state is doing something brilliant. And so how can, maybe this is a role for Pia, how do you cherry pick all of that stuff that they're doing good in the Indigenous context and bring it together? And I think, so I know that New South Wales, they've got the draft Designing with Country or Connected with Country framework. There's elements in that are really good, which can be caught, you know, captured in here. So how do other states do that? I know that they're doing some great stuff down in Melbourne there. So again, how do you bring it in here? But I mean, there's some great books out there. There's some great, you know, YouTubes, is that how you say it? I reckon, I keep saying you've got to have a cup of tea, and I use this word cup of tea. So you go have, you go and have cups of teas with Aboriginal people, and there's your resource. They'll tell you some amazing stories, and don't be fearful of stepping into space, because if you don't step into the space, then we continue to remain invisible in your work, and particularly the the built environment.
Look, Carol, thanks for sharing. I might just quickly jump in here and say, I think that the not being afraid to get things wrong when dealing with Indigenous community, just like going out and being like, oh look, I don't know everything, I might stuff up, please be patient with me. I think that kind of honesty would probably be really valued by community, and so obviously balanced with not putting all the pressure on community to teach you things that you should maybe know or could have Googled. But I think it's at least demonstrating an honesty of we might get this wrong, or this will be an iterative process. Let us help you. I think that's really important. And look, I think one of the steps that we could take, that we've all taken today, is just being conscious about what country we're on, and what communities we're working with, and kind of who are important stakeholders. So, okay, is it the Land Council or is there another corporation that we should be talking to? I think it's just demonstrating that awareness so that the local First Nations people don't have to teach you that. I think that that's really quite a practical thing and would go a long way to building trust and relationships. Ellie, you're a lecturer. I'm sure you're always spitting out resources and things for people. What resources do you have?
Look, I think the most important resource is having a yarn. Like obviously we can point people in the direction of books like this, which is incredible, loving it. But for us culturally, we share knowledge through song and through dance and through art and through different mediums that don't necessarily involve reading a book and picking up, and it's not necessarily words. We have oral traditions. So for me, I always encourage people that it's about dialogue, it's about having a yarn, it's about thinking of maybe in the last couple of minutes that we have here with you, like thinking about a personal commitment of what you're going to do with what we've had a yarn about, or something that you commit to. Like nothing's going to change unless it's collaborative change made up of individuals. Like this isn't the responsibility of PR. This isn't the responsibility of government. This is the responsibility of all of us. And so maybe just having a think, we hadn't talked about this, but in the chat, if you've been inspired by something and you want to make a personal commitment to read this book, somebody's just asked me, it's by Alison Page and Paul Mehmet. If there's something that has inspired you and you want to do, like go and watch one of these videos, or go and read the government architects thing, or have a yarn with somebody about what we've spoken about today, or, go out and go for a walk and think about what country means in the way that we've described it. For me, it's always about every individual being active. And I think that making personal commitments towards what you're going to do and how you're going to share your learning journey with others is the way that we collectively decolonize the system, and the way that we're going to move forward together. Because, Aboriginal people have, ideas and solutions, but we don't have, we're such a small part of the population, and we don't have the means or the influence to create the change that's needed for any of these questions to be resolved. So I think, I suppose my charge to people is get involved, figure out what area of influence you have on your projects in your personal life, have more conversations, and just be part of the dialogue. I suppose that's my tip or my call. Like our biggest resource is ourself and our influence, and changing our mindset, decolonizing our mind, and being committed to that process. Jesse, I'm keen to hear a little bit from you in terms of practical tips or things you'd like people to do.
Yeah, so well, it's not just for the planning industry. It's in general. I think it's a lifestyle that Indigenous communities, or not just Indigenous communities in general, just need to, no, not need to, I was just saying, but attempt to just better understand the context that and the ideals of the Indigenous context in everyday life. But yeah, sorry, Carol, you mentioned those books before by Bill Gammage and Henry Reynolds and Bruce Pascoe. So there's some authors and some books that I say, if you want something physical, they're books that you can read, and they're historians, and they talk about the context of the colonization. Go out and watch documentaries. If you're looking for the body corps, the Indigenous body corps that are around your land, there's an online native title interactive mapping that you can Google search, and then you can look through some of those documents. Follow groups and people on your social media pages. That's always a good way, because they're always updating. And that's, I guess, site specific as well. And you mob have already said as well, the best way you can do it is attend and participate in events that are around your community. And well, it's good to see you starting to do that right now, or continue to do it by participating with this this conversation between the four of us. But yeah, the best way is to engage with Indigenous people in the conversation, because we have our learning. Our best learning is through conversation. So yeah, so I think that wraps it up, and I'll pass it back to you, Moana, if anyone else has anything to add.
Yeah, look, I don't have anything else. Ellie, Carol?
One thing, and then I'll let you wrap it up, Moana. I just think we can all engage and connect with country because she's everywhere you are. All you got to do is just, sit and read Didiri, what Miriam Ungama Rose wrote. So she's the current Elder of the Year, Australian Elder of the Year. And Didiri tells us to, to be still. And if you be still and just close your eyes and let country, country be with you, just next time you're outside or even inside, just, close your eyes for a moment and let the traditional country, speak to you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to us.
No, absolutely. Thank you everyone for joining today. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it at the top of the session, but it will be recorded and the chat will be recorded too. So any kind of unanswered questions, we'll have a discussion as a group about how we kind of want to answer them and see if we want to put something out. We'll let you know. So this will be, it's recorded. It will be premiered again on YouTube tomorrow. And then I think the recording will be available for people to come back and watch. But look, really thank you to everyone. And I really think Ellie's call to action about making a commitment this NAIDOC week about what you'll do to work towards healing country and kind of incorporating First Nations knowledge into your work, I think is a really powerful call. So thanks everyone. Yeah, cheers.
Go well.
Good afternoon.
Right.
Stay warm.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Safe. Bye.
See you later.
Thank you.